My name is Jericka Duncan. I'm a CBS News correspondent. Thank you for listening to the I Am That Reporter podcast. And joining me today is Mr. Scott MacFarlane. Scott, I think 20 is your lucky number because you've been doing this for more than 20 years. You have 20 Emmys and Edward R. Murrow Awards. You joined CBS in 2021, at the end of 2021. You've covered the Congress, you covered the Justice Department for us, and you have chronicled the largest criminal prosecution in U.S. history, covering 1,600 federal cases brought from the January 6 U.S. Capitol riots. Scott, welcome to the program.
This is a blessing. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we've been talking about having a conversation for a long time, and sometimes it's specifically on a certain case that I have questions on. So to be able to interview you and pick your brain about why you do what you do, and you do it so well, I'm very interested in this particular podcast personally. So why journalism, Scott?
My backstory is weird. Getting into television, I was a lost soul in high school. Like a lot of boys, 14 and 15 years old, had no idea what I wanted to do. I was kind of a mess. I was probably a little bit immature, and nothing was sticking. Nothing was taking. Like I couldn't find a focus. And so my parents encouraged me to join the high school quiz bowl team, which is, you go on these competitions and you answer questions, school versus school, like trivia games. And because I watched Jeopardy with them and they thought I was decent at it. So I show up for the first quiz bowl match as a high school freshman and they put it on television. And there's cameras around you, Jericka. There's lights. You go into this TV studio. And I was pretty impressed with all that. And I go on there as a freshman. And to my surprise, to everybody's surprise, I just crushed it. We won the game. I was the high scorer. And we deduced after all was done, is I'm no smarter than anybody else. I was no better at the game than anybody else, but I was the only one who wasn't intimidated by the cameras and intimidated by the lights. And my parents said, why don't you try something like that? Because it's the first time you've ever felt confident at something or not intimidated by something. So that's where we started.
So, Scott, you found your way. You realized that you liked the bright lights and were able to stay laser focused, especially as a young person. That is very intimidating. Your parents steer you in this direction, and that is how you essentially get into journalism. So, by the time you get to college, what are you majoring in?
See, this was the first thing I wasn't scared of. Like in life, and when you're 14 and 15 years old, boy, that really lands. That really sticks with you. So I went to Syracuse University and studied broadcast journalism. I knew I also wanted to cover news because I loved watching the news at night. And confidence builds on confidence builds on confidence. And when you finally find yourself after you've been lost, it's easy to be motivated. It's easy to work hard.
When you think about the trajectory of your career as an investigative reporter, as someone that built your brand on making change, on exposing the truth, where do you see your role now as a journalist in your more than 20 years of doing this? How has the industry changed?
It's much different now. I mean, I think you can sense it by the day, changing in its tenor and changing in how you are to approach people. I think there is more connection people have with an individual message than they have with a group message. The more we broadcast, the more distant we are from our audiences. The more we personalize and talk to somebody one to one, the more we land with people. And I think you see that. That's why people who have social media influence have found their voice. They know their audience well and they speak to the audience singularly. Jericka, if I were to post some footage on social media that has all kinds of pre-production, that has all beautiful graphics and has some editing and has a set, the things we do on newscasts, they're not going to watch it because it doesn't feel individually for them. So what I see the change in trajectory in communication and news, where people are more desirous now of a one-on-one message, a more informal, straight to camera, as improvised as it needs to be, versus the gloriously produced things that we thought audiences wanted 20 years ago.
So it's interesting because I do think we know that our audience skews older, especially like on the evening news program. I think at one point I remember hearing the average age was like over 67 or something like that. I do think there will, in my mind, because I don't want our industry to die, but I want to believe that people still appreciate a well-produced show with facts, taking you somewhere and absolutely engaging with real people. But I'm kind of on the fence of, because so many people are kind of taking that independent route and doing that one-on-one and talking to the viewer. And it is nice because you get a more sense of who they are outside of this box of like coming up, you get a chance to get to know the individual. Therefore, you gain more trust with those viewers.
There's a few things working in our favor, though. First of all, there's always going to be a natural response, a natural reaction. And when you have this cacophony of people all on social media, all telling you what they think is the truth, eventually it all becomes white noise and undecipherable. So people revert to the brands and the traditions and the shows they know have verifiable, vetted information. It's
That's
always going to
true.
be a bounce back. And what's more, we're changing how we do things in a broadcast way.
That's true.
We're
Yeah.
we're not saying things like "Good evening, everybody," or "How are
Well,
you
wait a
all
minute.
doing?"
I do on the weekends. I say good evening. Thank you for watching.
You say "Thank you for watching." You don't say "Thank all of you for watching." You're personalizing it, Jericka. And you're speaking just to me when I see you on TV. You're speaking just to my mom when I see you on TV. You're not speaking to the audience as a mass. You're speaking to the audience as an individual. That's a best practice from social media that you do well with, but a lot of us are adopting.
Thank you. I think your social media videos are great because you break down the stuff that's very complicated. And I think we've talked about this before in terms of just how you keep it all together. Who is your assistant? Who are your people around you to make sure that you know the dates and the times, and especially covering 1,600 plus cases?
One point of fact I'd like to tell people about the January 6 cases. The cases are over, but the story's still going. We can talk about that sometime.
So, with your focus being on investigations right now, obviously there's a lot of frustration in Minneapolis about the federal government's investigations and handling of the shooting deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Some others who may not be getting as much attention, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Scott, Keith Porter Jr., who was killed by an off duty agent. Geraldo Lunes Campos, his autopsy recently showed that he died after guards at an immigration detention facility in Texas held him down and he stopped breathing. How crucial are these federal investigations, and what is your sense about whether people even trust the authorities? Because there's been a lot of questions about trusting the media, but a lot of times we are reporting what the DHS says or what this person said or what that person said. So how crucial are these investigations at this time?
I think that's the subtext of everything happening in Minneapolis. Is you're watching a horror, you're watching a confrontation, you're watching a battle between different governments. That's a real troubling dynamic. But Jericka, the subtext is people don't know who to believe. It used to be not too long ago when a federal agent, when the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, your local mayor, your governor made a statement, you took it to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened. The federal government or the state government's putting their badge and their reputation on the line when they tell us information. In Minneapolis, people aren't believing their government. And you know how destabilizing that is? Where you have people watching Saturday, and the Department of Homeland Security says the man who was shot brandished a gun, and their own eyes tell them he wasn't holding a gun. How do they rectify that? I mean, how do they absorb that information and go on continuing to believe their government? You have a number of Americans who don't believe the words of either the mayor of Minneapolis or the governor of Minnesota. That's a destabilizing dynamic. And as journalists, we struggle with this because it used to be if the director of the FBI said something, you could take it to the bank. And then there was the misinformation he shared about the hunt for the shooter of Charlie Kirk in 2025. And now you have people questioning when the Department of Homeland Security tells us something, if we can just simply report it. It's all a new dynamic. We're trying to figure out how to grapple with it.
As you're saying, I think as a journalist, we are taught to listen to authority figures. And, when I first started out in local news, if I had a story idea or a pitch and the news director would say, well, where did you get those figures? And I'd say, well, I got it off the sheriff's website. Oh, okay. It's cool then. But as you're talking about it, I can't help but think about many African Americans in particular in this country who have not always trusted authorities because there have been time and time again where people have been assassinated, killed. And you know that there's more to the story, but the people that are controlling the information know and knew even back then that they were in a position of power because that's the message that would be out there. What I see now are so many people kind of in this space of having a microphone, having a podcast, and in some cases challenging us to maybe ask a different question or to search or look into something a little bit more. So on one end, it's frustrating to be, I think, a journalist at this time, but it's also, I don't want to say checks and balance, but there are people constantly that will send me things or something that I may not have thought of. And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's just rhetoric and you have to filter through all the noise. But because of this device right here, so many more people have an opportunity to show a different side than what officials might have only shown us 20 or 30 years ago.
It's a great analogy. I think history is going to prove a lot of the symmetry there. The problem I'm having is we're accustomed to negligent misinformation, where somebody got something wrong while trying to get it right. Somebody was too hasty. Somebody didn't check both things in a public official, and they gave out erroneous information while intending to give out correct information. What I'm seeing is something much more pernicious. Because in the first case, somebody gives out bad information as a public official, you can explain to your audience, hey, they've changed, they've updated, they had something wrong, they've buttoned it up now, here's what's happening now. That's something we've dealt with for years.
Right.
In the case of January 6th, for example, get public officials knowingly, deliberately, nakedly spreading misinformation, intentionally so.
And you've talked about this recently. I've seen you were on the on WUSA on our affiliate in DC, and then most recently, I think it was Thursday night. In your tag, you said sort of on top of covering Jack Smith and him being questioned, you said in the meantime something to the effect of, actually, I think I have it in my notes because I try to come prepared. You said in the meantime, the White House has escalated this whitewashing of January 6th, including posting a government webpage with lies about the investigation and the attacks. When you say something like that in this time, and you're calling out an administration for posting a taxpayer-funded website that you say has lies, do you ever feel like what is it like to be Scott MacFarlane after those words are said, and do you get the backlash? Do you stand on it is what it is? I have receipts. I could show you that. And how hard is it when you are trying to gain the trust of Americans and do your job effectively, say that word, and it's very triggering to some people? Like, how dare you say that what's on that website is a lie?
Yeah, that's the whole shift. We're used to all these years of updating stories, correcting stories when necessary, or explaining that somebody got something wrong, and now they've gotten it right. This is different. There's a malevolence to giving out misinformation deliberately, and not only when it comes to January 6th, as the administration given out misinformation, they've done so with intent. That website is unequivocally a whitewashing. And we ran that through the checks here at CBS News to ensure everybody was comfortable with me characterizing it as such. And it came through clean through those checks that this is misinformation. This is a deliberate whitewashing. These are lies juxtaposed to some morsels of correct information to say that it was the Capitol Police who bore responsibility for their own beatings. Well, there have been several independent investigations of January 6th. That was never a component of what those investigations found. The White House pointed to no third-party, judicial, legal, or congressional investigations showing the Capitol Police were responsible for getting their heads clocked in, to getting maced, to getting punched, to getting injured by the scores, and officers were injured. So that's misinformation. The webpage includes all kinds of information that's just demonstratively false. So we have to characterize it as it is. But this is all a new frontier because We haven't taken pieces of history that were filmed, videotaped from all kinds of angles, and had government officials, not in my lifetime, go out there and declaratively say the opposite thing happened. It's there for all to see. Can't believe. Yet the idea of don't believe your lying eyes doesn't work right now because everything's caught on tape.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Epstein Files because that has been a story that gained traction during the election cycle. And even still, I remember listening to the news conference, I think it was in July or January when President Trump was asked about it. And he said, I can't believe you're still asking about the Epstein file. Like, this guy is dead. Let it go. But then, of course, we know there was an act that was co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats that the president signed in which all of these files were supposed to be released last month. What happened? And do you think we will get a clear answer about these thousands, millions of documents and what is in them?
I speak to some of the survivors, the ones who are comfortable speaking with media and engaging on this, and I've heard from more than one of them. They suspect these files will never be released, or at least they fear that there's never going to be a comprehensive, complete release of the files, even though it's required under federal law. So that's where their minds are at right now, at least some of them. I'm looking at the two different dynamics playing out at the same time, Jericka. You have a legal issue and you have a political issue that are somewhat crosswise with each other. The legal issue is that these files were to be released by December 19th, 2025. It's not December 19th anymore, and roughly only 1% of the files have been released so far.
And the DOJ says they're reviewing more before they release them, and that's sort of what they're claiming is the holdup.
And it sounds like an all hands on deck type thing where they have people by the hundreds going through this cavernous set of files that exist and need to be properly redacted, need to be screened, need to make sure that no state secrets are getting out, but that they're fulsome and comprehensive when they are released. But there's no date certain as to when it's going to happen. And that's troubling any number of survivors and members of Congress who fought for this.
What are you expecting to learn from the people that were recently subpoenaed? Les Wexner, the former attorney for Jeffrey Epstein, Darren Indyke, Richard Kahn. These are people that were supposed to be very close to him, that may know things. They're expected to testify before the House Oversight Committee. What more could we possibly learn that we don't already know? Do you think that they would add to a conversation that the victims would be happy with? Or is this all more of the same where someone's going to get up there and say they don't remember, they don't know, they don't answer questions?
Yeah, it's going to be one of those two. And it really could be. It could be an unsatisfying thing because the questions Congress may have may be uniquely specific in a way these people cannot answer. They may choose not to answer. They may have lots of information, none of which is illustrative because this is a pretty heavily investigated case to begin with. I don't know what to expect from that. But I also know that Ghislaine Maxwell is supposed to sit down with these investigators in Congress, and there's already this pre-buttal happening, Jericka, where you see survivors say, she's a known liar. She's a convicted liar. What are we to believe of what she says? I don't know what these congressional investigations are going to yield because the Department of Justice had a pretty fulsome investigation of some of this. But I think they're trying to get after who else had any knowledge of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing and who else was in this network of people who may have enabled, empowered, or funded his crimes.
When you speak to those victims, Scott, are any of them interested in naming names? Because while there's this feeling of them and them being a group that have come out and said, there's more to this story, and we want the government to showcase that. The question I think I've had, and I asked you kind of quietly, was any chance some of these women might name people that we don't know about? Is there still very much a fear that their livelihood is at stake if they speak up or say something or drop a name that we haven't already heard is somehow tied to or involved with Jeffrey Epstein?
It's a little less direct than that. A lot of these survivors have been, in some cases, suing to get their own files, records from their own investigation or their own case or their own complaint. And they have not been able to get those files, which is why they've been pushing for the full release. They want their own case information. And maybe those files have names or items, grains of an investigation that could tell you more about who supported or funded Jeffrey Epstein. Not so much that the survivors themselves have information they're poised to reveal. It's the paperwork that they haven't gotten yet and want has.
And thank you for saying survivors, because I said victims, and I know, having spoken to women who've been survivors of sexual assault, I think that is a preferred name reference when you're talking about them.
But there's also, Jericka, there's also the political framing here. The pressure was so rapid and so intense in late 2025. Not only did Congress pass this law requiring the Epstein Files be released, they did the impossible. They did so almost unanimously. This Congress can't agree on a lunch order unanimously. So that was a change, a shift in the politics. The president signed this law that he at one point was mocking as a Democratic hoax. The politics changed on it. And there's two sides to the politics here. You have Republicans arguing Democrats are Johnny-come-latelys to this issue. They've only got onto the Epstein Files when they saw it as a cudgel against President Trump. They weren't screaming from the rafters in 2023 and 2024. Democrats are arguing that that the legal cases had these things all bottled up until 2025, and that Trump was the one campaigning on this, that it was his surrogates, like the FBI director, arguing for the full release of the Epstein Files. Marjorie Taylor Greene, perfect example. Now, there's a hypocrisy to what the Republicans are doing now. So there's politics at play here, too.
Well, I know you will continue to cover the Epstein case, and of course, we will continue to watch. Something that I did want to talk to you about before you go is a story that we're hoping to air on the Weekend News soon. And this is an investigation into the increasing number of sexual assaults on airplanes. How did that story come to be?
There's a remarkably troubling number of people who've been assaulted by strangers sitting next to them on flights, cross-country flights, international flights, short flights. And we came across the story because we were at the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, for other matters. And we just kept seeing these cases pop up on the docket. And Alexandria, Virginia is the courthouse nearest to Dulles International and Reagan International airports, where there's a lot of flights. And a lot of these cases just kept surfacing. See them in California, in Illinois, in New York, in Texas. And if somebody assaults somebody on a flight in the sky, it's a federal FBI case a lot of the times. And those people are prosecuted in federal court. But nobody's been tracking how often this is happening. And when we got our hands into the work here and started asking the FBI for data, we found there have been many hundreds of these cases in the last few years. So many so that the FBI has special teams at airports to investigate the incidents. A couple common threads that make this important, Jericka. It's frequently nighttime flights when the cabin is darkened. It's often long haul or international flights when people have been on the plane a long time, a lot of them times taking alcohol or intoxicated. And often it's a young victim. Troubling for any number of reasons. The airlines say they're getting after it. The FBI is getting after it. Some of this is only so preventable, but it's happening.
And while, you would look at that number, I think, was it over 300?
It's getting to hundreds a year, but it's also wildly underreported because think about this. Think you're a 16-year-old girl and you've been shocked and stunned and assaulted sexually on a plane. And you got only minutes to make the decision to report it because after that, it gets real difficult. Passenger's gone. You're off the plane. There's issues of jurisdiction. Who's the police you go to now? It becomes a challenge to make these cases. And that's why there's a fear it's happening more frequently than we know.
Well, I'm so glad that you were able to highlight that issue. And I look forward to getting that report on the CBS Weekend News. And if not there, probably on a different platform. Another great thing about, I think, being in the media space nowadays, it's not just the shows that you can serve, but you have social media, you have streaming, we have the radio, and we try to be just about everywhere. Before you go, Scott, any predictions for 2026? I know we're at the end of January as we shoot this podcast here, but what does the Department of Justice look like a year from now?
It's already been gutted. There have been many hundreds of people who've left, many in protest, some fired for their involvement in investigations the president didn't like. Lots of new faces, lots of changes. Change can be good. Change can be bad. Inexperience is not a virtue when you're dealing with really complicated things. I think what we saw in Minneapolis will replicate in some other parts of America. I think there'll be other face-offs, and I don't think the political toxicity is going to decrease anytime soon. But can I give you a fun prediction?
Oh, please. We love fun predictions here.
Because you're the sunniest person I work with. So let's do that.
Seriously, I'm the sunniest?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of scary. That says
Far
a lot
away,
about you.
far away.
I don't think anybody would ever describe me as sunny.
I work only in truth. There's this wonderful nostalgia that's breaking out among young people for tactile things, CD sales, cassettes, tangible things. If they're recognizing now that having everything virtual and in your phone is not as satisfying as it is convenient. And I noticed this as a father of a teenager that he wanted a bunch of CDs for Christmas, and it blew my mind. And he explained to me why. He wants to be able to show his music. He wants to look at his music. That's the type of thing that really bodes well for those of us who do things like television, to those people who write newspapers or do drawing, people who perform on stage or in art. There's a desire for the tactile again. I think that's gonna define part of this year.
I love that. And live events, right?
Yeah, live events, something you can see
love a live
communally.
Event. Love a good gathering, panel discussion. Bring it back.
Being with people.
That's right. Back to basics. Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much for your time. Please follow him. He has his own YouTube channel as well, which I recently subscribed to. 18,000 followers. How did you do that?
I don't know, but my kids are not among them, even though they're on YouTube all day. And I think that's a statement. That's a value statement from the family.
Oh, it's okay. Well, you keep climbing. We'll keep watching, and good luck.